welcome to Deep Dive with Alvin. I am Alvin. Today, I will be speaking to the man himself, Antonio Stark. Now, let's get right into it. Antonio, it's been a while. It's great to see you again. Now, there is a question everyone's probably wondering. With a name like Antonio Stark, what on earth did he do with Iron Man?
Hey Alvin, it's great to see you too. It's been a while. My name is Antonio Fowl. It's my full name. It's not legal yet. I will change it at some point. But it has nothing to do with Iron Man. I got this name long before. I'm not long before, but like before I knew Iron Man, I knew a Tony Stark. But I am not. I don't hate the association, and honestly, Iron Man is my favorite character in the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm very happy to have that association, but still no association whatsoever. But he's a very cool guy. I really respect him. Really respect him. I do have his figure, not right now, but in my other factory office.
Well, yeah, that is really cool. Uh,
Actually,
yeah.
wait.
Alright.
Hi, Friday.
Oh my god. That's amazing.
Sure.
That's legendary. I
hmm
respect you for that. That's wonderful.
hmm
Now you are still in your 20s, if I am correct.
Yes,
And
mid
so
20s,
so how did
25.
you 25, yeah. So how did you get so deeply involved with space related topics and work in that field?
Well, anyone who knows me would know that I live space, I breathe space, I do space, I do everything space. It's been ever since my childhood. I just knew that I wanted to be in space. I knew that that was like the future of where humanity had to be. It came a lot from books and movies that I watch. I can name a few right now, but they're quite old. And it's a long standing thing where I knew that I wanted to impact humanity in a form that would transform um what would I say human evolution, just like the human perspective on things. I never really liked wars. I never really liked national boundaries and these artificial distinctions between people, and having I don't know, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the overview effect, but it's the fact that if you go and look and see Earth from space, it gives you a sense of unity. You see how thin the atmosphere is, you see how one Earth is. You don't really necessarily see borders between countries. You don't see like the color of people's faces or like how rich or poor they are. You only see one humanity. You really see that the whole it's like a spaceship going through space. I had that vision ever since when I was like really young, and whenever I was really feeling down, whenever really tired, I just look up to the moon and know that if I could build a city there on the moon, where you can just anyone could just see, look up to the night sky and see twinkling lights of a civilization there, they would know that whatever nation, the nationality that they were, or whatever ethnic group that they were in, whatever like gender, different things that they identified in, there on the moon, we have the frontier of humanity where they belong, where they're part of. That's the kind of mindset that I always kind of nurtured in myself, and that's kind of what pushed me forward. And that's how, like in my different space careers, I've had quite a few roles in the space sector. It allowed me to stay my focus to space and continue myself involving in it.
Yeah. The you call it the mirror effect, correct? Or
The
the
overview effect.
overview effect. My bad.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories of astronauts saying that exact thing that you just said. And yeah, I've also had the view for a long time of wanting to go to space, and that's always been a childhood thing. Like probably similar to you with books and movies. Now, could you name three of those books or movies that you feel inspired you the most?
Mm. I can give you one off the top of my head, which is Laputa Castle in the Sky. It's a Japanese animated movie by a very renowned studio called Studio Ghibli. It made like a ton of other movies like Howl's Moving Castle, um, etc., etc. But Laputa Castle in the Sky is based on the book Gulliver's Travel, where it actually has this floating city in the sky called Laputa. And what it gave, so the basic premise of the story, you have this very high-tech city that is kind of like the best of what humanity has to offer, but also later on like could be quite corrupt and actually like come to ruins and whatnot. And kind of gave me the
Yeah.
simulation like this city that's not rooted in one place at Earth has that mobility, has the ability to go around and pick out the very best that human has to offer, like the best engineers, the best technicians, the best politicians, the best of culture and technology all went into Laputa. And although we can't have a flying city, we can have an orbiting city or a city in space that would still function in the same way. That would still be that you could look up into the sky and see that city and like, oh, that's the potential, the full potential we can do. And that's what we should aspire for, and not fight amongst each other with the scraps. So that movie was honestly the single greatest motivation and inspiration.
Yeah, that I'll have to watch that sometime. That sounds really cool, actually. Now, there's a lot of talk about this second space race with billionaires in space and like building colonies on the moon and Mars in the next coming years. Now, what do you see happening in space exploration in the next maybe 10 to 20 years?
It's what we call two things, or you can say three things. I wrote a paper about this too. So it's called democratization, internationalization, and commercialization. So internationalization is like pretty easy. Basically, before in the first space race, it was the Soviet Union versus the United States. Now, and then it became kind of like Russia and the United States. And now, if you say the major space powers, you have the whole of Europe. That's part of the European Space Agency. You have Canada, you have the United States, you have Japan, you have China, you have Russia, you have India. These are all leading countries, but you also have a multitude of other countries like Australia or like other countries that provide different services, different satellite manufacturing services. Because so the whole space regime is becoming internationalized, and this is because what we call democratization of space. So before, space was a very tightly controlled single governance regime where it was a top down. The U.S. government would say, or NASA would say, we need to go to the moon, and then it would just follow stream to that. Everything would just be about going to the moon. Everything would be about Apollo, something like that. But now with democratization, the goals and strategies are not necessarily always coming from the top, or is there any at all? Like there's quite a few countries where there's no governing space agency or like a place that's giving out strategy. It's just different companies just saying, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that. And that's because the whole supply chain of space is being democratized. Like you don't need to be an American company to provide supplies to the International Space Station or to provide supplies to a satellite. You can, like a single satellite service can have a spacecraft, can have a satellite that was manufactured in Japan, that was launched from Arianespace rocket that would be launched from a rocket manufactured in French, but that would be launched from the equatorial regions in Latin America, and which downlink and uplink services will be provided by somewhere in Denmark. But image recognition and analysis will be provided by a company in India. There's no I mean, there are still restrictions, but the restrictions have been very lifted from previous regimes in what entities can participate in the space supply chain, and that's what we call the democratization. And the last thing is that the commercialization is what you said. We have a lot of companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Orbit, Virgin Galactic, as well as like previous like ginormous companies of Lockheed Martin Aerospace, Airbus, the United Launch Alliance that's coming into the sway. And what they're doing is that previously these commercial providers were just contractors to governments. Governments say, hey, we need a mission, and we just like contract out different services. So the only demand came from government. But nowadays, SpaceX is much of a satellite company as much as a rocket company. If you look at the satellite market in the world, most of the satellite services, satellites that's being launched is SpaceX satellites, Starlink satellites. Basically, what they're doing is that they have this rockets that they want to sell, but they're also providing the own market for themselves. They're being their own supplier and demand. That's what we're seeing by commercialization, is that the market itself is growing beyond governments, and market is expanding beyond like government entities, not over just single governments. And that's what we that's the three trends that we're seeing, and that's what we're gonna see for like the coming few years too.
Yeah, all right. That was a lot of information. I hope everyone got that. um, Now, following the entire space movement that's happening now, uh, I'm sure there will be at least at some point there will be some form of space army or diplomacy corps. And what do you think the future of that will look like?
So we definitely have space militaries. United States already has their space force as an independent branch of the United States military. The Russia and China also has their own space. They're not like full on space force, but similar space military branches that's under like other branches. Japan also has their own thing. And various countries in Europe are also having some space militarization, usually under the Air Force, but sometimes more independent than other, depending on like what country you're looking at. Space is becoming a contested environment, as we like to say, and there are space conflicts, especially because space debris is a threat. A lot of our infrastructure relies on space. Just knowing where your location is relies on GPS, but also a lot of our communication relies on space communication services. A lot of our information and intelligence relies on satellites taking imagery from space. Having those satellites go defunct or actually be attacked is a big serious problem, and it has been a big problem. Just like a few years ago, I think 2 and 3 years ago, India and China has committed what they call ASAT or anti-satellite weapons, which are basically missiles that can go as high up to actually target satellites. And they did it, and they actually did it against their own satellites. They created a bunch of debris, and it endangered other satellites, and that either intentional or unintentional, has dire consequences. And governments around the world would like to stop that from happening, or at least prevent that from happening. That's why they're investing a lot in their own space force capabilities, space defense capabilities, in defending their own assets or having temporary orbital assets up there, or actually just going all like full in and having space weapons, like weapons that can fire from space. We're talking about like what nuclear weapons and whatnot, but if you have like a school bus sized titanium rod and just release it in space, the sheer gravity, I mean literally the gravitational power it has is on the level of nuclear detonation, because gravity is hella powerful and titanium rods are pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So we have all that that's being thought of, and honestly there's no way to stop it at this point. It's more about how will you manage it. Space militarization is a trend. There's a spawning industry. It's just getting into the news media in the last few days, but it's something that's been in the works for decades already. Space has been used for military purposes ever since Sputnik was first orbiting Earth. So we're going to see that, and because in order to mitigate such conflict, the space diploma corps, as you mentioned, or some other space policy degrees are becoming more in demand. People are more interested in knowing about space law and space policy and how to mitigate it. I can talk a lot more about it because that is my profession and expertise. But yes, there will be a
Yeah.
lot more emphasis in that.
Yeah. Now, follow-up question: are there any like concrete laws for space militarization, or are they relatively loose? Since you said it is a relatively new sector, but it's still also been in the works. So, is there any concrete law that says you can or can't do X, Y, or Z?
Well, what's a law? Literally, law is what you say, and law is useless unless there's a body to enforce it. That's it. Law is artificial and arbitrary as any other law. For governments, government police and whatnot enforces that law, so the law is valid. But in the international regime, that's kind of hard. So in the international regime, we have international treaties that is signed by countries, and if it's more powerful becomes ratified, like endorsed and ratified. Ratify means that each country takes an international treaty and then writes their own legislature saying that kind of like goes along the lines of the treaty that makes it illegal for their country as well. So how strong a treaty is, it depends on how many countries have ratified it. But still there is no solid enforcement mechanism in place. Like for wars or invasions. People know that you can't invade another country, but as you know, current situation going on, it still
Yeah.
happens. And what happens is that you can't say it's illegal. It's illegal doesn't mean anything if you can't enforce it. And different countries try to come up with ways to try to enforce it by setting embargoes, by giving sanctions. Sanctions is literally a punishment mechanism to tell a country you shouldn't be doing this and you will be penalized by the international community for committing act XYZ. And that penalization is kind of what enforcement is. For international, for space, what we have is that we have this thing called the Outer Space Treaty, or the OST as we like to call it. It's been widely endorsed and ratified by, I believe, like 150 countries. So it's very well ratified and whatnot. But again, it was written a few decades, more than 50 years ago. I think about 60 years ago. At this point, when space exploration was thought to be a government thing, it did not think about a world where corporations will be doing space exploration. So we haven't had a law that really adequately addresses corporate or company led space exploration, because outer space treaty literally says each country is responsible for managing the space program and space explorations that happens within their own country. What does that mean? Literally, I just give an example that one space mission can have like six different countries involved in it. And what happens if a spacecraft goes defunct or it becomes space trash, or government doesn't have the ability to actually manage a particular space asset? Who manages it then? There's no law about it, or like if there's a law, there's no suitable enforcement mechanism about it. So that's why space policy, as for any other policy that has to do with international agreements, is very tentative and requires diplomatic work as well as legal work.
Yeah. So in short, just so I'm getting this correctly, uh, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that sector in terms of commercialization, or like bending the rules a bit more toward or around corporate space companies.
Yes and no. So right now, no, there are not enough laws to deal with the current space regime, which deals with which again deals with the number of countries that's being involved in space right now, the internationalization of single space missions, as well as the corporations. But it doesn't mean that there needs to be a law. A lot of things can be done without laws in place, and that's what we're seeing in space right now, because we know that trying to have new space treaty is just impossible. No one will sign it. No, I mean, people will sign it, but it will be like US alliance country will sign one type of treaty, and like Russia, China ish countries will sign different treaties. So there won't be a coherent set of treaties. So we're not thinking about that. What we're thinking is that we're trying to operate in the new environment without such laws and treaties, and by what we call international norms and best practices. And these are not laws. You can't enforce it. You just do it because it's just convenient for everyone, and that's what we're pulling right now.
Yeah. All right. And now the final question I have for you: what were your dreams when you were around my age, or maybe a bit older or younger?
I always wanted to build a city in space. Like I told you, I always dreamed about looking up and seeing a space city, and I always wanted to be the one building it. I always knew that, like when I looked at the moon, I knew that moon is going to change. That is going to have a city on it, and everyone's going to look up in the night sky and see, wow, someone built a city there. And I don't have to have my name in there, but I do want to be part of the effort in building that lunar, lunar village on the moon. That's my dream.
Yeah. Yeah, I can honestly agree with that a lot as someone who also really loves space. I at least want to be, I at least want to lay down one brick, metaphorically, in terms of a city in space, instead of just watching it happen and one day going there.
Absolutely. And knowing how space structures are going to be built, you mostly not laying a brick, but 3D printing.
Yeah,
To
3D
have it,
printing,
3D
3D
printing a
printing a wall.
habitat, 3D printing one by one.
Yeah, 3D printing a layer, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, it was great having you today. I hope we can another episode in the future. Maybe in a year's time or something like that. I hope
Sure.
to see you again, at least.
Thank you for having me
It was
here.
great having you.